Greetings and welcome to this very special edition of Campus Conversations. It is both my honor and my pleasure, with a little bit of sorrow, to welcome Chancellor Carol Christ for what will be, Carol, your final campus conversation.
Right.
Remind us, when's the last day?
The last day is June 28th.
Got it. So we're going to be talking more about your 7 years in office, and about what's currently on your mind and how you see the university. But let's talk first about the encampment. It's on a lot of people's minds about the protest, the encampment in Sproul Plaza. We had a little skirmish last night. There were 3 minor injuries. Explain for us what your approach is, what your stance, what's been guiding your decisions in terms of how our university is handling that sort of encampment.
Thank you, Dan, for that question. I know it's top of mind for many people, certainly is top of mind for me. I would say that I have 3 goals currently. The first is to enable our students to finish their courses and take their final exams with as little disruption as possible. The second is to enable our graduations to go forward with as little disruption as possible. And the third is to try to minimize any escalation. I believe that people have the right to protest, even though the protest is violating some of our time, place, and manner rules. They're not allowed to camp on campus overnight, but it's been largely peaceful, and it has not been disrupting our operations. And so what I've chosen, my stance is to, as long as it stays peaceful, and is not the site of pervasive harassment of others, to let the protest go on. At the same time that I'm in conversation with the leaders of the protest, trying to figure out how we can move forward.
Understood. Throughout the activism, the protests and demonstrations that have occurred on campus since October 7th, we've heard from members of a very diverse array of communities about the extent to which they feel physical precarity, discomfort, unease, unsafe on campus. And that's continued this week, as we've seen in weeks past. What's your response to that? What's your message to those members of the community who are deeply discomfited by one expression or another, one chant or another, one perspective or another?
That's a very difficult question, because we have in this protest a very, very sharp, legitimate differences of political opinion about the conduct and strategy of the state of Israel and what the future state should look like in the Middle East. Those can bleed over quite easily into expressions that either are prejudicial or some hear as prejudicial. It's very hard to draw those lines. What I would say is that the university is not intended to be a place that protects you against difficult ideas or ideas that you might disagree with. But it is a place that should ensure that each member of the community is not harassed or discriminated against on the basis of any element of their identity, whether that's religion or nationality or national origin, race, ethnicity. So anyone who feels that they are have been harassed should report it. We investigate every such report and take appropriate action. Obviously, the action isn't announced in the news because that's confidential. It's personal to the person that's being investigated, and we are trying. For example, we've stood up a service where There are people ready, it's called wayfarers, people we have hired to walk people past the protest that feel a sense of precarity in its neighborhood. So we're trying to do our best to assure an environment that does not discriminate or harass, but that doesn't mean protect you from opinions with which you may very sharply disagree.
In an earlier message last year in I think late fall, you expressed concern about the university's future if we couldn't uphold and gain adherence and support for our principles of community. You expressed concern for, I think, like the culture of the campus. Are you still concerned? And if so, what are we doing about that? And what can we do about that if we are facing a cultural crisis of sorts on the campus?
Thank you, Dan, for that question. I'm more worried than ever about it. It seems that we have lost, not just in the university, but more broadly in our body politic, the ability to have civil, respectful conversations about things on which we very strongly disagree. What we're doing about that is a number of things. We got some money from the Office of the President, about $700,000, for programs that increase the capacity for dialogue and try to reduce or eliminate bias and discrimination. We sent a call for proposals out to the campus. We got 72 responses. We chose what we thought were the best of the proposals that we got, and that money now has been allocated. Most of those programs will really start up in the fall. In addition, Letters and Science is developing a one-unit course for all its freshmen in free speech. So we're trying, and we will try to create programs that model how you have a conversation, a dialogue, a debate with someone with whom you disagree, with respect and with civility. If we cannot do that, I think we are lost as an academic institution. It is so important to a democracy and to the university to have the capacity to talk about ideas about which we may disagree, with the intention that we will both get closer to an understanding, empathy with the other, and also perhaps get closer to understanding of the issues.
Yeah, based on what you say, it sounds like the stakes go well beyond just the university or higher education as a sector. Some of these things, these phenomenon and these currents and trends you're talking about are society-wide, right? I mean, there's also a greater ramification, it seems.
Absolutely. The world of social media has enabled people to live in social echo chambers of, like-minded people. I think the pandemic has reduced our capacity for being in community. And it's something we all have to work to build again, because it's so much a diminishment of our world to not have that capacity. It's a threat to democracy, and it's a threat to the university as well.
I'm going to go in a second to some questions that have come in from the audience about protests and the larger issues. Before I do that, just for those of you who joined late, we're in campus conversation today, the last campus conversation with Chancellor Carol Christ. If you have questions, please post them to our Facebook Live site, and we'll do our best to get to them, though we already have a large number of really excellent questions. Anyway, here's the first question. It says, what parallels do you see between the Vietnam War protests and the encampment of today? Do you think it's fair to say that time usually tells us that student protesters are on the right side of history? So the first one is about difference, and the second is whether protests are sort of a moral weather vane of the right way to go.
That's a really interesting question. First of all, the parallel I've been thinking about a lot, mostly because I have pictures of it on the wall of my office, is the free speech movement, which of course is on the Sproul steps, the Mario Savio steps, right in Sproul Hall, where this is. And I do think this is the free speech conflict of today in relationship to that earlier conflict about free speech. The Vietnam War protest was somewhat different, I think, in that the thing that's so incredibly painful about this protest is it's student against student. It's faculty member against faculty member, and the issue seems to go to the very heart of some people's identity, whereas in the Vietnam War years, I was certainly one of those protesters in those years. There was much more unity in the student body. So it was much more the student body against the government. And so I think this particular protest is more painfully divisive, more painful. It is certainly true that I think student protest is a moral weather vane. Whether to choose a line from a 60s song, you can say that that's the way the wind is going to blow. I'm not so sure.
Got it. Nice reference there. Question that came in. This person says, I remember back when right-wing speakers, I think they're speaking about Milo Yiannopoulos and others, came to town and generated student protests. What parallels do you see between those protests and the current protests sweeping college campuses?
Yeah, again, it's a similar answer to the one I just gave. In the case of conservative speakers coming to campus, I felt so strongly they have a right to speak on campus. And I have felt the same thing with controversial speakers that have come pro-Israel speakers, some fairly far to the right in Israel's political landscape that have come to campus in the context of the current conflict. I feel that any legitimately invited speaker has the right to speak, that seems to me that the very core of the identity and values of an academic institution. What's different about this is, again, the kind of the way in which it's divided the community, which is, even though there was a group, obviously, of students who wanted these very conservative speakers to come, it wasn't divisive of the entire community in the way that the current crisis is.
So the next question comes from somebody who has concern about what they perceive to be a narrowing of viewpoints on campus and the desire of students not to hear opinions they disagree with. And they wonder if we have enough diversity of perspective among our faculty, and whether we have enough classes and forums that present differing viewpoints. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Having talked a lot to faculty on this very issue over the last few weeks, I can assure you that faculty do not share one point of view by a very great long shot. And I do think there's a lot of diversity among faculty about lots of issues, not just the Israel-Palestine Palestine conflict. And I believe that any responsible teacher, when teaching a subject, not only expresses their view, but expresses how they got to that view and how you might get to other views. So that doesn't mean that you have to say, oh, well, I believe the world is round, and this is how you would believe the world is flat. But I mean, if you're discussing, I certainly, when I taught, when I was arguing for a particular reading of a novel or a literary moment, I would say, this is how I interpret it. This is a point of view other people have, and this is how they would justify that. I don't think it's teaching your students critical thinking not to both be specific about what is the reasoning that's brought you to your point of view and how you might get to another point of view.
Yeah, love that. Last question on this front, we're going to turn to some other issues. This is an interesting one. Do you believe it is the university's role to educate students how to distinguish facts from narratives? Should students be evaluated on their ability to distinguish between facts and narrative in order to obtain a degree? And in a way, it's also a question sort of about media literacy and discernment about information sources. What do you think about that?
Oh, that's such an interesting question. It's really a great question. What
Yeah.
I would say is there aren't a lot of facts that don't have narratives attached to them. So I'm a student of narrative. And I believe we are a storytelling species. And so I think it's important that narratives are attached to facts, and that you can judge both the way in which a narrative is or isn't grounded in facts, but also understand that in any narrative, there's a point of view. And so I wouldn't distinguish in that way, in the way the question seems to, facts and narratives. I think that they're mutually dependent and that it's really important as part of a student's education at Berkeley, to teach him or her both to judge narratives, but also to compose narratives. That there's almost nothing we do that doesn't have a narrative attached to it.
Wow, what an interesting answer. Yeah. Okay, we're going to move into some related issues, but different. I want to first ask you about your appraisal of the state of the university, and then I want to go from there and talk on a broader level about the state of higher education, because I know you have some thoughts and some serious concerns. But first, Berkeley, what's your current assessment of where we are, challenges, opportunities, the road ahead?
Well, that's such an interesting question. And of course, there's not a simple answer to it. Berkeley is such a large and complex community. So I could talk, for example, about the extraordinary advances that we have across any number of fields of science that are changing our world, even as we speak. Artificial intelligence, CRISPR, the creation of new synthetic molecular materials with the capacity to capture water, capture carbon, quantum theory. I mean, just this is a scientific moment that is really just extraordinary. And that creates, I think, a kind of urgency for the humanities and the social sciences in helping us think about what are the ethics, what are the policies that should guide us in relationship to these technologies, what are the narratives that we should tell about them. It's so important a moment. We have the most extraordinary student body here, really amazing, amazing students. When you're walking around campus now, you see all these, young women in their white dresses with their graduation sashes around their necks, or young men in suits with their graduation sashes. And you think about the extraordinary people they are, getting ready to step into the world with the education that Berkeley has helped prepare them for that world. And that's always a really exciting moment. We have a more diverse student body than we've ever had. That's really exciting. We just finished this enormously successful comprehensive capital campaign. That's really exciting. But then we're in the middle of the most painful political conflict right now with the encampment and with the debate about Israel and Palestine than certainly I've experienced in my academic career. So, and then we have the challenges of financial austerity that seems kind of constant. So it's a combination. I've had reason to quote Charles Dickens a number of times in A Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And I think we're at one of those moments where there are some extraordinarily wonderful things happening in our university and some extraordinarily painful and difficult things happening in our university.
Before we move to higher education as a whole, since you're talking about the road ahead for Berkeley, I'm pretty sure Rich isn't listening. But what do you think about Rich Lyons as the next
Uh,
up in the Chancellor's
well,
office?
just between the two of us, Dan, I think he's a fabulous choice.
Higher education as a whole, I mean, it's become a political football, something I would have never imagined when I was growing up. It seemed one of the most apolitical sectors in the American society and economy. But I know you have some concerns and thoughts about that, about the grand landscape of higher ed in the United States.
Yeah, I have many concerns about that. First of all, who would have thought opening the New York Times, you would see at least a page, sometimes a double page, like this morning on stories about higher education. So it's become a big political issue. The wedge to this issue has been anti-Semitism, but I think that it's actually much bigger than that. And the way I've been framing it as I've been talking about it is a line from Arlie Hochschild's wonderful book, Strangers in Their Own Land, which is she describes the concern of this rather conservative community in Louisiana as who gets to be first in line. And I
Hmm.
think if you think about the kinds of controversies we've been seeing, controversies about the privilege of the Ivies, for example, their endowments, their admissions selectivity, the kind of influence and networks and wealth that an Ivy League education often leads to. Or if you think about the debate about affirmative action or DEI, it really has to do with who gets access to privilege in our society. And higher education is one of those privileges people are jealous about. I mean, if you think, as a person or as a parent, my son or daughter, first of all, I can never afford $100,000 a year for, my son or daughter's college education. And besides, they never would get in anyway. Then you tend to turn against it. You think that's not for the likes of me. And so we have a number of crises that are not exactly intersecting, but they're really piling on to each other. There's a crisis about affordability. There's a crisis about access, particularly to selective institutions. There's a crisis about political bias that cuts many different ways in our leading universities. And it all, to me, is the kind of root cause of it is deep, actually conflicting narratives, to use that term again, about prestige and access in our society.
Yeah, a lot to think about there. I want to turn back to your tenure. Um, you were retired before you stepped into office. What led you to decide to step out of retirement and come back into the working life 7 years ago?
Well, first of all, I stepped into it 8 years ago
Oh,
when I
sorry.
became the interim provost. And at that time, Berkeley was facing a lot of challenges. And I felt because of my long history at Berkeley and because of my angle of sight into some of those difficulties, I felt I could do something
Hmm.
that might help the university move forward. I'm at the part of my life when I'm giving back. I am enormously grateful to Berkeley. It has given me so much. It's made me the person that I am. And I started understanding that I might have something to contribute. I never thought it was going to be 7 years. I remember telling Janet Napolitano, 3 to 5 years, I'll try to get Berkeley through this crisis, but it's lasted longer, in part because of the pandemic, than I anticipated that it would. But
So
now I'm going to succeed at retirement.
okay, yeah, I've kind of gotten that impression in the last few weeks. With that in mind, what would you consider your major accomplishments during these last 7 years in the chancellor's office?
I think one of the most important is that I've put student housing and the importance of building more student housing right at the top of Berkeley's agenda. So people weren't really talking about it before we started really focusing on it. I see every morning when I drive to work, I pass by Anchor House. That's, ready to come online. The opening ceremony is the beginning of August. We have a equally large graduate student housing development going up in Albany. One of my fondest wishes, I'm not sure I'll live to see it in the 2 months I have left, is to put a shovel in the ground at People's Park. But we have a number of other housing projects that are in various stages in the pipeline. So I feel like we have that one of my successes as chancellor is putting that on the center in Berkeley's agenda. I think another thing is, of course, the campaign. I'm so pleased. We raised $7.37 billion for Berkeley, more than our goal of 6 billion. So that was certainly something that was important. We have been becoming more diverse. It's been a rockier and a steeper slope than I had hoped, but I think we are making progress, and so that's really good. So those are three that I think are important.
And on the other side of the coin, any things that you didn't get done that you wished you had? Any regrets looking back, or a sense of unfinished business in any particular area?
Yeah, I wish we had gotten farther with NAGPRA than we have. I've been putting lots of resources into it,
Let me
and
stop you for a sec for people
oh,
who
NAGPRA, the Native American Graves and Repatriation Act, that's the return of human remains to tribes. I think it is a terrible violation of those ancestors to have them here. I want to return them as soon as we can. That's been slower than I would have hoped. I had hoped when I came into office we would have a Native American initiative at this point, and that's also been slower than I hoped. But diversity is still a work in progress, though I'm working at that. Another area where I'm not satisfied at how fast we've been able to make progress is deferred maintenance. I know it's not, terribly glamorous to talk about, you know, um, plumbing and various things like that, broken elevators, but we just have so inadequate a stream of resources that we're directing toward deferred maintenance, and that's really a problem for the campus.
I want to turn to some questions from our colleagues, sort of more personally oriented. Oh, my phone just shut off. There it is. The first one is, what will you remember most from your time as chancellor?
Oh, I will remember the people that I've met. I mean, one of the wonderful things about being chancellor is you get to meet such a wide range of people, students, faculty, staff, but also the alumni, and with incredible stories, the philanthropists that are motivated to give to the university. So it's the people that I'm really going to miss.
That's the answer to the next question, which is what you will miss most, but I think you just answered that, and also what you will remember. Here's the next one. Kind of interesting. Millions of people are being more open about burnout. Were you ever at that tenuous point yourself? What are the strategies you use to keep yourself recharged and so effective despite the extraordinary events of recent years?
Well, Matthew Walker, as a faculty member in our psychology department, taught me about the importance of sleep. I read his book on sleep. I'm very close to the beginning of starting this job. So sleeping well, making time for things that you love to do. For me, it's playing the viola, it's reading, spending time with friends, spending time with family. I think it's so important to keep balance in your life, and that a very easy way to become burned out is to work constantly, not giving yourself the kind of time and experiences that recharge you. I go to Cal Performances a lot. That's one of my, secrets for recharging. It's really making sure that you have balance in your life and making place for the things that feed and nourish you.
All of this is leading me to wonder, like, What are the secrets to success as a president or chancellor of a university right now? I mean, across the country, we see presidents and chancellors in the spotlight, being called up before Congress, trying to maintain calm, and the institution's values at a number of different universities. Is it become a thankless job, or is it a job or is it a job that's still so important that we're still going to have capable people? And if so, what's your advice to them? What's the
That's
secret to
really,
success?
that's such an interesting question. First of all, I don't think it's a thankless job because I get thanks all the time from people, which is really nice because then I can remember the times when people aren't thanking me, they're blaming me or expressing great unhappiness with me. So I mean, in part, you have to have somewhat of a thick skin and not take things personally when people are very critical of you or your policies or things that you've done. I mean, that's important. I mean, I think leadership jobs like this are always going to be attractive to some people who want to make a difference, who deeply love the institutions that they go to, who deeply love higher education. So that's really that's really important. I think one key to success is becoming very good at listening, um, to not think you have all the answers and think that, coming into an office like this and a job like this is a kind of invitation to just decide on a bunch of things you'd like to do and then tell people to do them. I don't think that successful leadership works that way. I've often said that leading an institution like Berkeley is much less like being a CEO. In fact, it's not at all like being a CEO. It's much more like being a mayor of a city that has numerous stakeholders, all of whom think they deserve a voice in making decisions about where the institution should go. So, one secret is listening. Another is being decisive. I often think that making not the optimal decision, but a decision is really important. And explaining yourself when you're making decisions about why you're reaching the decision that you're making is important. And then having a clear sense of what you want your goals to be, and goals that are achievable, and are important for the institution. So those are some of the things I think are important in being a successful leader.
Yeah, that certainly resonates. Another question that came in, it's kind of an interesting one. This person says, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you lived with your grandchildren while you have been chancellor. In what ways did living with young ones influence you as chancellor?
Oh, that's funny. Well, that actually only was true for a year, but it was my first year as chancellor, and it just creates a sense of proportion. That kids are, they live in a world that's proportionate to where they are, and it makes you not take yourself so self-importantly. I remember I was having a conversation with the older of my two granddaughters, who was, let's see, she was 5 or 6 then, and she said, "Grandma, are you the principal of this school?" And I said, "Well, yeah, Edie, I guess I am." And she said, "That makes sense. My principal has gray hair too."
Oh gosh, there you go. I want to go back to something you said. You talked about, that in terms of your diversity goals and aspirations for the institution, diversity goals and aspirations for the university, that the progress hadn't been quite what you hoped or expected. What were the nature of the headwinds that you think, or are the nature of the headwinds that the institution confronts in terms of those goals?
That's such a wonderful question. I mean, they're somewhat different. The headwinds are somewhat different for our main underrepresented groups. Um, for African American population, the percent and the number of Black high school graduates that have completed the A through G requirements with a B average or better is quite small. So the problem is really in the pipeline. That's true for Native American students too, but the numbers are even more vanishingly small. And then another huge challenge that we face is that high school preparation is so unequal. So we've tried to overcome that in our admissions process, really trying to look at each student's achievements in the context of their opportunities. But there's so many high schools, for example, in California, that don't even offer calculus. And when a student comes in without calculus to one of our STEM majors, they're behind the 8 ball from the beginning.
Mm.
And so we have to do a lot more with figuring out what we can do to create a more level playing field as students enter that makes up for the profound inequities in our high schools, our K-12 systems across the state. So that's really a huge challenge. And then another huge challenge is just making sure that our students feel a sense of belonging when they come here. When you come here with an experience that involves prejudice and discrimination, it's hard to slough that off when you come here. This is a big place. It is hard to find your way through it. And it's a harder place to find your way through it if you come from fewer economic and social advantages. And so making sure we have the right programs to support students to make easy their wayfinding as they come here is another big challenge.
Yeah. Wow. Um, Looking ahead, few people have asked and are wondering, what are you going to do? What are you going to do on July 1 when you wake up that morning and in the days afterwards?
Well, on June 30th, when I get up that morning, I'm getting on a plane with my son and my two granddaughters, and we're flying to London. I said to my granddaughters, I really like to take them on a vacation wherever they'd like to go, thinking they'd say like Disneyland or something like that. They said, London and Paris, Grandma. So that's where we're going. And I'm really looking forward to that. But when I retire, I'm looking forward to doing the things that I love to do more than I do now. Playing music, reading. I intend to do some writing, not quite sure what form that's going to take. Seeing friends, seeing a family, traveling. I love to travel. So those are some of the things I'm looking forward to.
What I didn't hear in there is any plans or thoughts about staying engaged with higher education, either as a speaker or as an advocate. Is that something you feel like that's for the next generation or the next leadership, something you're gonna step away from entirely?
Well, first of all, I am on some not-for-profit boards, including the board of the Central European University, which is the university that George Soros had founded, that was in Budapest, was kicked out of Hungary, went to Vienna. So I will continue to be involved in that. Higher education is my life. I'm not gonna stop thinking about higher education, writing about higher education. But I believe when you leave a job, you leave a job. I mean, as of July 1st, this is Rich Lyon's show. It's not mine.
Okay, I've got it. Um, so I really just have, sort of one final question. I mean, you've got a lot of staff who are listening in, and I think with the high regard so many people hold you in. And I think there's, people are concerned about our future, particularly at this juncture. So I'm kind of making it easy for you to reassure everyone. But in all honesty, what is your message to all of us, who work at the campus for it's a huge part of our lives, obviously the center of our professional lives, during this moment of both transition on our campus and tumult in higher education?
I mean, the thing I believe that the story of Berkeley is not one of going from triumph to triumph. I
Mm,
think it's one of resilience. If you think of all the crises in the past, um, There was the faculty revolt in the 1920s. In its beginning years, the University of California was a very fragile place. It wasn't at all a given that this was going to succeed. There was a big fight in the legislature about how agriculturally and pragmatically oriented the curriculum should be versus, a more traditional letters and science curriculum. That was a big conflict in the university's early years. If you think just closer to the present, all the moments of crisis, from the free speech movement to the Vietnam War to the Third World strike, and all of the crises since. And it's very easy at any particular moment to be a little bit like Chicken Little and think the sky is falling, the sky is falling. But in fact, the university has always faced challenges, and I think really overcome those challenges very, very well. It's one of the things that I so value about this university is how creative and resilient it is. And I want to say to the staff who are listening, how much I value the work you do. I think that Cal has the best staff in the world. You're so amazing. You're so smart. You're so creative. You're so dedicated. You work so hard. And the university to run depends on you. So I want to say one big thank you, and to say that things always will change. And will there be things challenging in the future? Of course there will be, but there'll also be incredible, wonderful things that will happen in the future as well.
Thank you. So, Carol, there are not really any more questions because my screen here is filling up with something that you're not always crazy about, which are compliments. But an extraordinary number of people, and I really want to convey it. Really grateful for your leadership. I'm just reading here for your impact. Your grace and concern are some of the words here. Your legacy, and just a great deal of thanks. I mean, the comments are just sort of pouring in right now. And I want to convey that, and just also my own appreciation for the time and effort you've put into these conversations to share your thoughts transparently. It's been a pleasure and honor to work with you, and obviously so many other people seem to agree about this assessment so many of us have about your extraordinary leadership.
Well, thank you. It's been the privilege of my life to lead Berkeley, and I have so much love for this campus and gratitude toward it.
All right. All I can say is next campus conversation with Rich, I hope I see a question that comes in from you.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you,
Thank
Chancellor.
you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for this kind of sad but celebratory campus conversation. We'll see you down the road.
Thank you.